If you're a resident concerned by short-term rentals or STRs, this one's for you. Unless you live in a tourist destination, you might not know how contentious of a topic STRs can be. From code enforcement issues at problem properties to influence on house prices, they can have a big impact. In recent months, the county's been receiving a huge number of complaints about how the proliferation of STRs has been having a big impact on the availability of and cost of long-term rental housing. The county spent many months collecting feedback and paying consultants to look into this issue. I've got the report in front of me here, and I want to give you my take. First of all, in my previous professional career, I want to let you know I've got a lot of experience reading and digesting these reports. In fact, I read thousands of these. One of the aspects of my previous career was researching companies and industries, deciding whether or not we should invest, and getting a feel for how risky those investments would be. When you're selling a company, it's a very common practice to write a memo, the seller writes a memo, outlining the company and telling the buyer why they think it's so good. It's very salesy and it's designed to get as much interest as possible. Sellers know that buyers want more unbiased information. So it's also common practice for the sellers to commission a report by a third party, kind of like the one written by the county, and send that to buyers as well. Here's the problem with that. Even though the report writers work for a different company, it's not like the sellers don't have input. The process doesn't happen in a vacuum. The sellers provide input as it's written, and they absolutely preview it before it gets sent to prospective buyers. So when I receive a report like that, of course I'd read it, but only a fool would make an investment decision before doing their own work. I mention this because there's a similar dynamic here. No company's getting bought or sold, but the county commissioned and paid for this report, and it absolutely would have seen it and signed it off before it got sent to the public. I'm not saying this because I think this report is full of falsehoods, but we all know data can be presented in different ways to tell a different story. And I don't think it's a stretch to say the county would prefer that this report says there's not a problem, because if there's not a problem, you don't have to fix anything. I also want to be clear about what's being presented to us here. We've got one report written by one set of consultants and then an opinion and interpretation of that report presented by another. Again, there's not necessarily anything untoward about that, but I just want to highlight it because it means there are a lot of opportunities to manage and massage the messaging to tell the story the county wants to tell. Second, I want to be upfront about my own bias and background here. I live in a tourist area with STRs. I don't own one myself. I do know people who do own them. I've rented them, I've got friends who rent them, I'm sure maybe you have as well, and I also live in a neighborhood that's had STR problems in the past. My personal view is that they perform an important function in an economy driven by tourism, but they also have a cost. A cost to neighborhoods in terms of disrespectful guests, a cost to neighborhoods in terms of potentially disrespectful owners, and also a cost in terms of the availability and cost of long-term rental stock. Before I get into the detail here, I also want to use this issue to highlight the inequity in the county's STR policy, and also why I think the unincorporated areas of the county deserve a representative on the Board of Supervisors. That inequity is that the county only allows STRs in mountain and desert areas, the vast majority of which are unincorporated. The county's decided that STRs will be allowed in our neighborhoods, but not the vast majority of neighborhoods in the county. All the other supervisors and candidates live in incorporated areas of the county, and no one else has personal experience dealing with this issue living in a neighborhood where STRs are present. In a later video, I'm going to talk about the role of empathy in politics and why I think my background and experience means I can empathize with more people in and around District 3. So if you live in a tourist area with STRs, believe me, you have my empathy here. Okay, so now let's spend a few minutes actually talking about these reports. You should read them yourself if you're interested, but the punchline conclusion to the question, do STRs have an impact on the availability or cost of long-term rental housing? Their answer is, we couldn't find enough evidence to support that. Of course, the devil's in the detail. And what they also didn't say was, we found empirical evidence to support the opposite. What this report really aims to do is assign responsibility to other factors, such as people moving out of cities into rural areas during the pandemic. And that in and of itself isn't a crazy statement to make. I myself moved out of the city during the pandemic, and I'm one of the stats in here about a vacant home now being occupied by an owner. But just because the pandemic could have been an original driver, that doesn't necessarily mean there's not a problem. If you read through the detail of this report, some interesting facts pop out, such as The economics of STRs are attractive to owners. In this very report, they point out the fact that in just over a week of renting a property as an STR, you can often generate the same revenue that you'd rent a long-term rental for. And I get it, if you own a second home, wouldn't you want to be able to use that house every once in a while you're renting it out as an STR? You can't do that with a long-term tenant. In a lot of markets, there's a pretty big price premium for properties that can be rented as STRs. What that means is if you own an STR, it's often worth up to $100,000 more than a property that can't be rented as an STR. And yes, that usually means STR properties are a bit nicer and a bit more well invested, but that means if you're an owner, there's an incentive to make that investment because it means your property is worth a lot more money. By the report writer's own admission, some of their data set is incomplete. If you weren't aware already, the Sheriff's Department in San Bernardino was recently subject of a ransomware attack. That means they got hacked, they had to pay over $1 million to get the data back, and it's not clear that during the writing of this report whether the data hadn't been restored yet or the criminal investigation was still ongoing, but the conclusion is the data wasn't available to the report writers. And the data in question here is on evictions, which is really important to understand long-term rental trends. Again, by the report writer's own admission, finding data on long-term rental prices is difficult. Since 2019, by this report's own admission, there's been a huge proliferation in the number of STRs purchased or converted. So let's say I was writing the opinion on this report and I only pulled out the headlines I just mentioned to you. I think you can get an idea of how I could tell a pretty different story. And here's that story. A huge growth in the number of STRs fueled by attractive owner economics has pushed up house prices and removed rental stock. And how could you even disagree with me when you don't even have the rental data to dispute it? This isn't even me saying that my version of the story is the correct one. I just want to show you how data can be interpreted to tell the story you want. So now that we're in the position of paying consultants what could be hundreds of thousands of dollars to give us what could be potentially a biased conclusion, what are we supposed to do? Here's what we know for certain. If you live in a neighborhood with STRs, this is a hot button topic. I attended one of the county's research sessions that they put on before writing that report, and let me tell you, it was heated to say the least. Also, just because now we have a report saying there's inconclusive evidence to suggest that STRs have an impact on long-term rental pricing, it doesn't mean we shouldn't do anything. People on both sides are upset here. In the coming days, I'm going to release my first proposed policy position on STRs. In large part, that's based on looking at other cities who have managed their STR issues effectively, such as the city of Palm Springs. I've been discussing this issue with some of their elected leaders, as well as representatives from some of the STR platforms themselves. And when I release it, I'd love to get your feedback as well. Here are a few things it's going to include. 1, a sensible cap on the number of STRs per neighborhood. I don't know what that is yet, we've got to work it out, but it does seem like the right thing to do. Restrictions on corporate ownership. I think we can all agree it's a bad thing for neighborhoods when corporations own houses instead of neighbors. And 3, a requirement that income generated by STRs gets invested directly back into the neighborhoods that have them. The last one I feel particularly passionate about. We all need to acknowledge the inherent unfairness in the county's approach to STR licensing. Most STRs are located in unincorporated neighborhoods, and nearly all of them are located here in District 3. That revenue should stay here. And what should we do with that money? I don't know yet, but we have plenty of big problems here. Whether that's insurance policies getting canceled or shortcomings in disaster relief funds, there's no shortage of potential uses. And I'm not saying this money will solve any of those problems, but I do think it's worth a look. More broadly, I'd support STR regulations that allow for uniform application of STR rules in all neighborhoods across San Bernardino County. That would allow for incorporated cities or even homeowners associations to make their own rules or to ban them if they wish. And that's a similar setup to Riverside County and its relationship with Palm Springs. I don't think it's right that such local issues are being decided by people that have no real connection to our neighborhoods. The whole point of representative government is to actually have representation. And I think it's time that the San Bernardino County Board of Supervisors has a representative who knows what it's like and who can empathize with what it's like to be a resident in an unincorporated part of this county. If you like or agree with what I've had to say, I've got a few favors to ask of you. First, I'm just getting this channel off the ground, so please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Second, this campaign relies purely on donations from people like you. Visit my website at smithforsb.com, click the donate button, and help support the campaign today. In the meantime, stay tuned for more videos like this, and if there's anything you want me to talk about, let me know in the comments below. Okay, until next time, take care.